Picture this. You spend 20 years building a massive, scary machine. You tell the whole world that this machine is perfect. You say it never makes mistakes. You say it does exactly what you tell it to do. But then you look inside the gears, and you see the machine is starting to eat itself. That is exactly what is happening to Vladimir Putin right now. For a long time, Putin's power came from one simple idea: control. He wanted us to believe he was the master of everything. He wanted us to think his generals always said yes. He wanted us to think his army was a disciplined giant that never talked back. But tonight, that image is shattering. We are seeing something that wasn't supposed to happen. Something Putin has tried very hard to hide: resistance. And I'm not talking about protesters holding signs in the street. I'm not talking about kids posting angry videos on the internet. I'm talking about the guys with the guns. The people whose job is to fight the war. Top officials in the United States are watching this happen in real time, and they are calling it a serious red flag. But why are they so worried? If Putin's army is fighting itself, isn't that good news? Well, hold on. Because the answer is a lot scarier than you think. Let's look at the facts. Putin has always sold himself as the strong man. The guy who knows everything. The guy whose security team sees everything. For years, we thought his military might be clumsy or brutal, but we never thought they would disobey him. But over the last 3 years, we have seen that story fall apart. First, there was the mutiny. Remember the mercenary group, Wagner? They took over a whole Russian city. They drove their tanks almost all the way to Moscow. That was a huge shock. Then, Putin had to fire his top defense guy, his right-hand man, because of corruption and failure. Then came the horror stories. Reports of soldiers being beaten or even killed by their own bosses because they refused to go on suicide missions. But this week, something changed. Something that might be even more dangerous for Putin than a mutiny. A highly respected military boss spoke up. This wasn't just some random soldier complaining. This was a guy who used to command the ground forces. A guy who wore the big medals. A guy who benefited from Putin's system for years. He gave an interview, and he didn't scream. He didn't shout. He calmly explained that the whole invasion of Ukraine was built on lies. He said the information they had at the start was garbage. He said the leadership pretended everything was fine when it was actually a disaster. Think about the famous plan to take the capital city, Kiev, in 3 days. This general called it a fantasy. He said it was based on fake numbers and wishful thinking. Basically, he said the system lied to itself, and the soldiers paid for those lies with their lives. Now, pause for a second. In Russia, you don't just say things like that. If you call the war a war, you can go to jail. Thousands of normal people have been locked up for saying much less. So why is this guy still walking free? There are only a few reasons. Maybe he is reckless. Maybe he is desperate. Or maybe, and this is the scary part, he knows that a lot of other powerful people agree with him. He isn't talking to us. He is talking to the other officers, the colonels, the majors, the guys leading the brigades. These are the guys who get the orders. They are told to send untrained men into deadly traps. They are told to keep attacking, no matter how many bodies pile up. And when a top general says, "This is all a lie," those officers listen. This is what has American spies sitting up in their chairs tonight. They aren't just looking at one angry general. They are matching his words with months of secret reports. They are looking at morale. They are looking at discipline. And the picture they see is ugly. Independent investigators, the ones who work outside of Russia because it's not safe inside, tell a grim story. They talk about Russian commanders shooting their own troops if they retreat. They talk about punishment pits. Imagine a hole in the ground, covered with a grate. If you say no to an order, they throw you in there. They starve you. They beat you. And when they let you out, they send you to the most dangerous part of the front line. That is not how a confident army acts. That is how a terrified army acts. It shows that the leaders don't have respect anymore. They only have fear. They have to use terror to make their own men obey. And it's not just the soldiers. Even the people on TV, the ones whose job is to praise Putin, are starting to crack. Usually, these experts just repeat what the Kremlin tells them. But now, they are admitting things aren't going well. They use code words, but the message is clear. They admit Ukraine hasn't collapsed. They admit Western money hasn't stopped coming. They admit Russia is losing a crazy amount of men and equipment. For a government that survives by faking reality, these little slips of truth are a big deal. But words are just words, right? What matters is what happens on the ground. And on the ground, the math is getting worse. In eastern Ukraine, the Russian army has spent 2 years pushing forward. They are trying to take a single city. And the cost? It is stunning. Western experts say Russia has lost tens of thousands of men to take a tiny strip of land. Ukraine says, sure, they took some ground, but they bled their own army dry to do it. It's like trading a mountain of gold for a handful of dirt. At sea, it's even worse. Russia had to pull its big ships back. They are hiding near the coast because Ukrainian sea drones are hunting them down. So, imagine you are a Russian officer. You were promised a quick victory. You were promised a parade. Instead, you see your friends dying for a few meters of grass. You see your ships running away. You see an endless treadmill of death. That is why this new resistance is happening. Intelligence agents in Washington and Europe are watching closely. They aren't just looking for soldiers running away. They are looking for something bigger. They are looking for the officers, the bosses, saying no. And they are seeing it. They see commanders arguing with political minders. They hear quiet complaints about lack of ammo. They hear complaints that the men have been in the trenches for months without a break. The signals are getting louder. Now, does this mean Putin is about to be overthrown? Is there a coup coming tomorrow? No. Don't get ahead of yourself. This isn't 1917 yet. We aren't seeing soldiers throwing their captains into the river. But to the people in the US government, this is still a huge deal. It means the foundation of Putin's power is cracking. The idea that the man with the gun always obeys the president is under attack. Remember the Wagner mutiny? It only lasted 1 day. The leader of that mutiny died in a plane crash 2 months later. Surprise, surprise. But the scar from that day is still there. Inside the Pentagon, analysts still talk about those 24 hours. They remember watching regular Russian soldiers just stand aside. They let the mutineers drive right past them. That was the moment everyone realized. Wait a minute, maybe the army won't save him. Since then, Putin has tried to fix it. He fired people. He shuffled the deck. He put an economist in charge of the defense ministry, a guy with no uniform, to try and control the money. He even arrested some people for corruption. He tried to make it look like he was cleaning house. He took over Wagner's business. He took over their news outlets. He wanted to send a message. I am the only boss. No more warlords. But here is the problem. You can fire a general. You can arrest a deputy. You can move money around. But you cannot fix trust. Once trust is broken, it's really hard to glue it back together. Especially when you are asking men to die for you. When a top general goes on record and says, "We lied to ourselves. We misled the president," that is a direct shot at the system. He isn't blaming some low-level spy. He is blaming the whole way the country works, and US officials are taking notes. Because when a system starts to doubt itself, it gets dangerous. It gets unpredictable. In Washington, this isn't just a history lesson. It's a right-now problem. We have a new administration coming in. President Trump is back. His team has released a new security paper. On the surface, it looks a bit friendlier to Russia. It talks about avoiding a big war. It talks about making a deal to end the fighting. The Kremlin even praised parts of it. But behind the scenes, the career professionals, the spies, the analysts, the military planners are waving a warning flag. They see a Russian leadership that is nervous, a Russian army that is tired, and a Russian elite that is starting to fight each other. In secret meetings, the phrase "serious red flag" keeps coming up, and they are using it in 3 ways. First, the brutality. When you have to shoot your own soldiers to make them fight, that is not strength, that is weakness. It means you know they don't believe in the mission anymore. Second, the public criticism. If Putin lets that general talk, It looks like he can't stop him. If he arrests him, it might make the other officers even angrier. It's a lose-lose situation. Third, the rumors. Even the pro-government bloggers are complaining. Leaked documents show that even Russia's secret police are worried. The story they tell their own people is wearing thin. So, what does this mean for the rest of us? Why should you care about cracks in the Russian army? The US has studied dictators for a long time. They know what happens when these regimes get stressed. It doesn't always mean they collapse right away. But it almost always means they make bad decisions. They make decisions based on survival, not logic. For Ukraine, this is both good and bad. The good news? A divided Russian army is weaker. If the generals and the politicians are fighting, they can't plan good attacks. They can't rotate their troops. It makes it harder for them to keep grinding forward. The bad news? A scared Kremlin is a dangerous Kremlin. If Putin feels weak, he might feel the need to show he is strong. That could mean more missiles hitting innocent cities. That could mean attacking the power grid in winter. That could mean threatening to use nuclear weapons again, just to scare the West. For the US and NATO, this is the big question. How do you deal with a Russia that is breaking? The Trump team wants to keep talking to Moscow. They want to avoid a total crash. There have even been rare phone calls between US and Russian generals, just to make sure nobody presses the wrong button by accident. But tonight, as the resistance inside Russia grows, the risk assessment is changing. They are asking a terrifying question. If Putin gives an order, will it happen? If he orders a launch, will the finger on the button push it, or will they hesitate? You might think hesitation is good, and maybe it is, but in a crisis, confusion is dangerous. Confusion leads to mistakes. These questions affect everything. They affect where NATO puts its missiles. They affect how much money goes to Ukraine. European leaders have to decide, are we dealing with a master chess player or a guy trying to stop his own house from burning down? Remember the last time this happened. When the mutiny started, nobody saw it coming. For 24 hours, the world held its breath. We had to wonder what happens if a nuclear-armed country falls into a civil war. That is why Washington treats this retired general's interview as a red flag. In a system like Russia's, the line between talking about the past and attacking the present is very thin. People don't talk like this unless they smell blood in the water. Maybe they sense Putin is weaker. Maybe they want to influence what happens next. Maybe they're just trying to save their own skins for when the war ends. So, as you watch the news tonight, as you see the reports of attacks and front lines moving, remember this. Wars aren't just decided by tanks and drones. They are decided by people. They are decided by belief. If the guy with the gun stops believing in the guy giving the order, the war changes. Inside Russia, that belief is dying. The cracks are getting wider every day. US officials see this as a warning. We are entering a volatile time. The biggest danger might not be Putin's plan. The biggest danger might be what happens when the people below him decide they've had enough. For Ukraine, the fight goes on. It's brutal. It's daily. But they know one thing. Time might not be on Russia's side after all. For America and its allies, it's an uncomfortable truth. A weaker Russia isn't automatically a safer Russia. It might be a Russia that lashes out. A Russia that takes crazy risks. A Russia that burns its own soldiers to keep the lie alive. That is the reality tonight. A president who thought his control was absolute is facing resistance from the very people who used to be his strongest supporters. A military that is starting to leak its doubts to the public. And a world that has to figure out what to do next. History teaches us one thing. When strongmen start to fear their own armies, when they have to use force against their own ranks, the story isn't over, but the page is turning. How it ends will depend on decisions made in Moscow, in Kiev, and in Washington. But one thing is clear. The image of the invincible master is gone, and that is a serious red flag. Not just for the Kremlin, but for all of us who have to live with whatever happens next.